Hi, my name is James Rozak. I am the creator of the website Morning Mercy, and this podcast is dedicated to helping support those people who are on a journey away from the teachings of William Branham. Today, I'm going to be answering a question that was left to me through this podcast, and it has to do with the responsibility to family who are still in the message. It's a very frequent question that I've received. So I'm just going to read the question and then I'll get into my response. The fine line of leaving family behind. Do we go back for them? Do we leave them alone? I'm asking because I'm always torn with my mom and siblings who have opted to turn a blind eye. And I feel like I'm obligated or I owe it to my young nieces and nephews to get them some information. Okay, so this is, of course, something that would weigh on the mind of anybody who's left and yet they still have family members of whatever type. In many cases I've heard it's parents, it's children, it's spouses even. It's certainly a very emotional thing to think about because as somebody who's recognized the problems with William Branham's message, you can't help but look at the rest of the people and think, why can't they see it too? How can I help them see it? And ultimately, the question is of responsibility. Are you responsible to get other people out? But to speak to the heart of the question, I think, I envision somebody who's struggling with that dynamic of family on how to maintain a delicate relationship with them, yet knowing that there's this issue, this problem, which caused you to leave the message, and you would love to be able to introduce those issues to them. And the amount of responsibility that you have in informing, say, somebody that you care about deeply, like a sibling. And then if your sibling is parenting children of their own, you can recognize the vulnerability of those kids, and you kind of want to spare them that trouble. So how much responsibility do you bear even in that? This is just my opinion and from where I'm standing, but I just recognize the difficulty. I don't feel like you're responsible at all. It's bigger than you are. So for you as an individual to turn around and face this Goliath of an issue where everything in your life is at stake, like by incorrectly approaching, and I use the word incorrectly, that's not even the right word, but just approaching, say, a mother over this thing that she passionately holds to be true and doesn't want to even look at it. And now you're going to approach her with information that's going to rock her world. Her response might not be very positive. Even though she loves you, it may change the dynamic of your relationship. And so you have to consider the weight, the risk of what that's going to do to your relationship. And for you to bear the responsibility of what happens after, you can't be responsible for changing their mind. You can't be responsible for the fact that they've been indoctrinated for however many years, for the fact that they raised you and have brought this influence into your life, and now you're responsible to change their minds. You're not responsible for the outcome. You can't be. However, what you can do is, to take opportunities to be able to introduce things to them that might impact them. And you have to do it wisely. So choose and pick and make decisions that come from your perspective of your relationship, of your own ability and comfort to bridge these difficult subjects. And if you don't feel comfortable at all, you can't carry the guilt of not knowing how. We're not all wired the same. Some of us are more confident speaking to spiritual issues, and some of us aren't. Some of us don't want to rock the boat so much that we lose the relationship with a sibling. And you might rather choose a less volatile path of just maintaining peace And that doesn't make you a bad person for not challenging your family. It's difficult. And I think we all recognize that. And so don't bear that too much on yourself. That's my ultimate response to the specific question. Don't feel like this is life and death, your job to change your family. It's too big. It's too big to make that your responsibility. Do what you can. Do what feels right. Do it when it feels right. And then do it in a way that is effective. And I'm going to get into that now. So my answer might be a little different than what somebody else's answer might be. And it really comes down to where you're standing and even the relationship you have with the people still in the message. Something like how recently you've left the message could really impact the response that you might have or the way you think about this subject. If you've recently left, there's a sense of urgency that comes with being a part of the message or any hyper fundamentalist group. And to explain that just a little bit, when you're in a group like the message, you're dangled from this thin little thread over which you're hanging above this sense of impending doom. And on the other end of that string that you're dangling from is your pastor, is William Branham, is the message teaching, the belief system that we held. So the urgency that you're left with is like, I got to hold on to this rope. I have to hold on to this string. I have to hold to my faith. And I need to do it right now. Like right now, I have to hold on harder than I've ever held on before because the time is late, the world is ending. And that's the mentality that you're always presented. And you don't even know you're living under that sense of urgency, of danger, perpetual, unending danger. So, of course, that's going to impact you in the course of leaving. And that's one of the reasons why it's hard to leave in the first place, is that fear that's attached to that. That essence will hang with you as you leave. So that'll also impact the way that you look at people within the group. You can't help but think, I need to save them. I need to save them soon. I need to save them now. I need to get them out. I have to give them information. We need to talk about this right now. Over the course of time, the further you're away, the more you're going to recognize that unhealthy relationship with time and urgency. It doesn't mean that there aren't important things, but the time and the gap that you have to figure things out constructively, healthy, with critical thought, where you're looking at the scenario, you're weighing out options, you're considering your next step. You have time to do all of those things. So that also slows the process and urgency of feeling like you need to rescue people from the group. And one thing that's important about that is that before you can go rescuing other people, you need to make sure that the number one thing that you're responsible for isn't other people, it's yourself. You need to, when you first leave the message, is to not take ownership of more than you can hold, is not to be responsible to more things than you can carry. Because when you leave, you have a big, enormous thing to take care of, and that's you. You've been through a traumatic thing. Your mind is a fog. Your heart is a mess of emotions. Your sense of who you are, your identity has been so associated and tied and connected and defined by the message that you need to figure all that out in yourself. And that's going to take time. Finding a healthier sense of self is going to set you up to be able to approach people who are in the message in a much more effective, constructive, mindful way. So when you're first out, you might be very irrational and rash and undefined about what it is that you're trying to accomplish. You might even misconstrue the motivation that you have. Because there is such thing as having good and healthy motivations and having negative and detrimental motivations. And so let me explain that a little bit. Like if the motivation to get somebody out is coming from that, what I previously described as that sense of urgency, it's not a good motivation to be acting on urgency to get them out. It's not a healthy place to act from. If you're also acting out of fear, that's not a good place to act from, because you're going to be like transferring your own fear that you hold, that you haven't resolved yet. You're going to be transferring that to them. Because I don't think fear is an extremely healthy motivator. It's an effective motivator, but it's not necessarily a healthy motivator. If you're also acting out of anger, you're angry at what happened to you. You're angry at the message. You're angry at William Branham. Anger, again, is not a very effective place and motivation to be speaking from. If you're acting also from a place of just wanting to win, the satisfaction to feel justified, that like, I wasn't crazy. I wasn't out of my mind for making a decision to leave. Here, let me give you all the information to just prove and justify myself. Again, that's not a very good motivation. And it's not going to be very effective in helping somebody to escape. Starting from a good place could include just having a genuine loving concern for somebody. Like you want them to get out because you have loving concern for their health and well-being. You maybe also recognize that they're trapped in something that you were trapped into. And when you have that experience of being free, you want them to have that feeling of being free as well, where their mind begins to uncloud and they can very clearly begin to recognize the deception that was taught and fed to them. So again, that's coming from a good, healthy perspective of just wanting them to be free from the deception, from the manipulation. Also wanting them just to have understanding of what's happened to them and the way that their life could be better by being out of that pressure cooker that they're always contained in, always abiding by other people's opinions and thoughts for them, not being able to make decisions really of their own volition and their own accord. There's a saying that I came across years ago that has always stayed with me, and it's that persuasion is better than force. And I wholeheartedly believe that you'll never be able to force somebody out. You can't force them to see something that they don't want to see. You can't force them to acknowledge something that they're not willing to process and work through on their own. So again, are you responsible to make somebody see something different? You can't be. You can't be responsible for how they feel and how they speak and how they think. You can't be responsible to that degree. But as far as being effective in trying to influence them, well, there's ways to approach that. Now, again, I'm speaking from my manner. I have a manner to me. I'm a diplomat at heart. I'm going to always try to approach any dialogue I have with a sense of respect for my opponent, even if they come at me belligerently, arrogantly, angrily, whatever emotion they're projecting on me, I don't have to reflect that back at them. I don't like those feelings of feeling pressured and antagonized. So I don't like making other people feel that either. So even you'll notice in the comments, when people leave comments to me that are negative, so whether it's to this podcast or on my website, when you look at how I respond to people, I'm always trying to be diplomatic and fair. I'm also trying to be polite. I'm not trying to come across as arrogant. I don't need to engage in hostility. And so that's also my approach in when I think about the way that influence can be exacted on with somebody. Now, I recognize other people are more straightforward with me, and that can be effective too. So if you're going to engage with somebody, you have to know yourself. You also have to know the person you're speaking to. If they're going to be somebody who wilts under pressure, then applying pressure is not going to be effective. And maybe you're not even the person to do that. Maybe your relationship is such that you're not going to be an effective witness for the other side. It could be that. So know yourself, know your temperament, know the person you're speaking to and the way that you should engage. And then think about how you could engage. And that, for me, and again, my mannerism, this is me speaking for me. but kindness and being welcoming. There's something just very good about that. If I can be kind to somebody who's angry at me and not just put on, like genuinely just kind because that's who I am. If you can get to that place of kindness, you're going to be able to have a much more civil and kind interaction. And if it goes astray and it's trying to drag you into unkind things that you have to say to defend your position, then I suggest that the dialogue that you're having isn't very constructive. Coming from a point of patience and calmness, knowing that you're not going to convince them probably in one conversation, that the breakdown of their thinking is going to come piece by piece by piece, thought by thought by thought, by a compounding of problems that could be presented to them. And they're going to have to break it apart on their own in their own thinking. And that's going to take time. It could be a period, for me, it was a period of years probably of just recognizing issues. And then at the end, it wasn't anybody holding a gun to my head. It was me just recognizing that, okay, there's an issue here that I'm aware of it. And I might even dismiss it. But I tell you what, I don't think you really forget it. And then another thing comes along and it's in your mind and then you brush it aside. But then when you brush and brush and brush and brush things, next thing you have a pile of things over here that have bothered you. And if you're over there as a figure who's been kind to them and you've been patient with them and you're even empathetic to them and even respectful to them, like they're in the message and they've made a choice to be there. For my position, I have family that's still in the message and I have to respect the fact that they're there. I have to respect the fact that a part of that is their decision. They're making that decision to stay there in part. I can't demean them to make them think that I believe that they're foolish and stupid. I can't do that because again, that goes against the grain of being kind and patient and understanding of what's going on. I have the additional information and understanding that they're being highly impacted by the environment that they're in, that there's all kinds of tactics that are affecting their thinking and their ability to reason and to freely break away from the pressure that they're under to continue believing the way they believe. That's the reason that we were all a part of the group, is we were confined to this environment that was impairing our ability to think. Your loved one is experiencing that as well. So have that sense of empathy and understanding. And then in the meanwhile, you can offer respect for their position and their choice, while also understanding that their thought and their thought process is also impaired. So be patient. And in the meanwhile, accumulate knowledge so that if some point along the way their pile has gotten big enough to where they need somebody to speak to, you've built rapport with them, that you're somebody that they can come and speak to, and you're not going to jump down their throat and belittle them and make them feel shame and any of those things. That there's all kinds of negative connotations and words that can be applied to the way that two people interact. And if you can put in place enough positives, that's going to also position you to be somebody of influence when they do want to ask questions. There's modes of behavior which are going to be detrimental to an interaction that you have with a loved one. And that is, if you're arrogant, if you're forceful, if you're demeaning towards them and you have a very, you take on that position of moral high ground. We always criticize message people of being lofty and having this moral high ground, like we know better, that we're smarter, that we're above the rest of the world. Well, you can also take on that kind of demeanor and attitude as an ex-believer. You could look down on message people like they're a whole bunch of idiots and they're just fools and deceived and and they're horrible people, and you can look down on them and mock them and pity them and do all of those types of things. And if you're doing that, you're losing rapport. So positioning yourself to just be available emotionally, that your feet are on solid ground, and all of those things are going to be a result of you being responsible for the one person that you can be responsible for, and that's yourself. Be responsible for yourself to get better, to find a healthier framework of thought. Now, the other side of the coin, it's not that you're responsible for anybody else, but your compassion and care might mean that you're always looking for opportunities to extend and reach out. And how you go about that, again, begins with you coming to a place of being very healthy and whole and healed. The more healed you are as an individual, when you then begin to approach your family members, you're going to be coming from just a much more stable, well thought out way. So that when you do pass information to them, and there's nothing wrong with you doing that. Because yeah, you might feel like you owe it to your nephews and nieces who maybe are being prevented from accessing good information. Maybe there's going to be an opportunity. You can just ask a question. You maybe can just plant a little thought in their mind. And I think the best thoughts that you could present is in practice and demonstration. Like if you want to be persuasive to somebody else, again, being persuasive in the way that you conduct yourself. And that's the dilemma that you put somebody else in when you see somebody who was in the message, who leaves, who's thriving. That's a very strong case to make to a loved one who's in the message. That's the biggest compliment you can give to yourself, is to go on and live a very constructive, healthy, authentic, positive life. And that in itself will speak volumes to somebody who's waiting for your ultimate destruction when you leave. Go live a good life. Go live a positive, healthy life. And that's going to impact somebody who's in the message. I also have a view that maybe not everybody would understand or agree with, and that is respecting the autonomy of everybody to choose where they are and how they want to live. If I've had at some point some kind of constructive conversation with somebody and I recognize that they're completely content with being where they are in their life, and that could be as a message believer, for me to continually interfere with their choice to be a message believer, I don't feel like that's constructive either. There's a point of dignified respect, mutual respect that you can share. And if you can get to that point where they're happy to have you in their life and you're happy to have them in your life, and you figure out how to walk the intersection between the two worlds, because yeah, they're very different perspectives, but you can still maintain a sense of family, of love, and yet hold your differences. I don't think that's entirely bad or negative. I also think there's a fine line between interfering in somebody else's family. So when you're talking about nieces and nephews and feeling obligated to tell them under the radar of their own parents, there's a moral question or ethical question in that. Because I know I wouldn't necessarily want people coming to my children and trying to proselyte my children from beneath my feet. I think you have to have a perspective on their age, whether they're at a point in their life when they have they're of age to, say, make decisions for themselves, and how you go about that, not demeaning their parents. I'll let you decide or interpret what I'm trying to say, but I do think, even though we come from a place where we believe that the message is wrong, as an act of integrity and ethics, I think you have to be careful meddling with somebody else's family. I would just say, just be very mindful of the circumstance and situation so that you're not interfering in a way that I think reflects poorly on an individual. And of course, you have to judge the safety of the people involved. Like if there is a situation where you estimate that a family or a church is actually placing people at harm, like literal harm, then you have a more difficult decision to make on how much you are willing to risk to interfere in the said situation. So that's my answer. It's not direct. It's not looking at the people in the message and think I'm responsible to helping those people. Even what I do on Morning Mercy, it's not me thinking, gosh, I'm going to create material that's going to convince the world that they have to come out because I feel obligated. I don't. I do this because I feel a sense of compassion and empathy. And I have a great deal of understanding of how hard leaving the message is. So if you're leaving, I want to be able to leave something in my footsteps for somebody like you who's watching this to come along and say, hey, like, I really need something to help me along the way. And if they come across my material, I've left something for them. I'm not going to convince anybody who's in the message and locked in that they have to leave. No, I'm not. But if you happen to come along, well, I'm living my life in a way that I'd like to leave positive footsteps and breadcrumbs to something that's better. And that's all I'm doing. Start with you. Be responsible to you, for you. Take on that responsibility and embrace that wholeheartedly. And that's going to open up opportunities, should they come, to be an effective witness to somebody who's still in the message who has questions. That's my response. Don't feel like you have to go back and do anything. And also, I'm going to say this. Not everybody is cut out for it. There's going to be people who their mind works in a way where they have the intellect to debate and to discuss heavy doctrinal issues, and they're going to be able to go into those heavy, deep thinking weeds with somebody who's in the message. You might not be wired for that. I'm not even wired for that, and I was a preacher. That's not where I operate. I operate more from the space of the heart, I guess you could say. And some people aren't even good at that, and they just don't feel like they have the capacity to do that. And to take on the weight of responsibility will bring you to a place of feeling guilt. Like you're guilty because you can't help them. And that's not a healthy place to live from. And if guilt is your motivation, then it's not a very good and effective motivation either. Don't let guilt play a role in feeling like you need to help people. That's not a healthy foundation to work from either. Get well, get healthy, and operate from that point of perspective. I hope this is helpful in some way. And if you have any other questions, feel free to ask them. I have a couple more questions that I'm going to begin answering over the next little while. Thanks for watching. My name is James, and this is Morning Mercy.